You start something with fire in your chest, a hobby, a project, a new passion. You tell people about it. You rearrange your schedule for it. You think about it while brushing your teeth. And then one morning you wake up and the thing you loved now feels like homework. You open the app, the document, the notebook, and you just stare. The spark is gone, and you don't know why. You're not lazy. You're not uncommitted. You didn't lie to yourself when you said you cared. But now, when you think about doing the thing you once couldn't wait to do, all you feel is resistance, maybe guilt, maybe nothing at all. And the worst part? You can't explain it to anyone, because from the outside, it looks like you just quit, like you lost interest for no reason. But that's not what happened. Your brain didn't stop caring. It stopped trusting that caring was safe. This isn't about being fickle. It's about what happens when your nervous system decides that excitement is expensive. Let me say this clearly. If you lose interest in things you once loved, you are not broken. You are not shallow. You are not incapable of commitment. What you are is someone whose brain has learned to regulate intensity by shutting it down early. And that makes perfect sense when you understand what's actually happening beneath the surface. Because here's the truth no one talks about. Passion doesn't just disappear. It gets buried under the weight of what it costs to sustain it. The first thing to understand is that losing interest isn't about the thing itself. It's about what engaging with it requires from you emotionally. When you fall in love with something new, your brain lights up. Dopamine floods your system. You feel alive, motivated, focused, but that state is fragile. It requires energy, attention, and a sense of safety. And if any of those things become unstable, your brain pulls back. Not because it doesn't care, but because it's trying to protect you from disappointment, exhaustion, or failure before they arrive. Think about the last time you started something new, a creative project, a fitness routine, a relationship. In the beginning, it felt effortless. You didn't have to force yourself. You wanted to show up, but then life got complicated. Work got heavier. Someone needed something from you. You missed a day, then two, then a week, and when you tried to come back, it didn't feel the same. The ease was gone. Now it felt like obligation, and obligation doesn't inspire you. It drains you. So your brain makes a quiet decision, withdraw. Not dramatically, just gradually. You stop checking in. You stop thinking about it. You tell yourself you'll come back to it later. But later never really comes. And eventually, you accept that you've lost interest. But what you've actually lost is the feeling that this thing won't hurt you. This is where attachment patterns come in. If you grew up learning that excitement leads to disappointment, or that wanting something too much makes you vulnerable, your brain starts to preemptively detach. It's not conscious, it's automatic. You get close to something, you start to care, and then your system whispers, this won't last. So you pull away before it can pull away from you. It's not apathy, it's self-protection, dressed up as disinterest. You see this everywhere. The person who's passionate about writing until they share their work and it doesn't land the way they hoped. The person who loves running until they miss one race and suddenly can't lace up their shoes. The person who throws themselves into a new friendship until the other person doesn't text back fast enough, and then the whole thing feels too risky to maintain. It looks like they quit, but they didn't quit. They just hit the point where their brain said, caring this much isn't worth the crash. And the crash is always what the brain is trying to avoid. Because if you've experienced it before, if you've felt the sting of pouring yourself into something and watching it fall apart, your system remembers. It doesn't want you to go through that again, so it dims the light early, before you're too invested, before it matters too much. It's kinder that way, or at least that's what your brain believes. But here's the part nobody tells you. The same mechanism that protects you from disappointment also robs you of depth, because depth requires time. It requires staying past the honeymoon phase, past the point where things get boring or hard or uncertain. And if your brain is wired to exit before that point, you never get to experience what it feels like to love something through its mundane middle. You only ever experience the beginning, and beginnings are easy to lose interest in because they're designed to end. This is where it gets interesting, because the behavior doesn't stay the same as you age. When you're younger, losing interest quickly might feel like freedom, like keeping your options open, like refusing to settle. But as you get older, it starts to feel like something else, like a pattern you can't break, like evidence that you're incapable of sticking with anything. And that shift, that realization that the thing you once thought was a personality trait might actually be a defense mechanism, that's when the shame creeps in. You start to wonder if you're sabotaging yourself, if you're running from things that could actually matter, if you're letting fear masquerade as preference, and maybe you are. But even that makes sense, because if your brain has learned that caring deeply leads to pain, then of course it would find ways to keep you at a distance. Of course it would convince you that you're just not that into it anymore. Of course it would let the interest fade before the stakes get too high. And here's what makes this so hard to recognize. The brain is incredibly good at making this feel like a choice. You don't feel like you're avoiding anything. You just feel done, bored, over it, ready to move on. But if you look closely, if you track the pattern, you'll notice that the loss of interest almost always happens right before things get real, right before you'd have to show up imperfectly, right before you'd have to admit you care enough to be hurt. There's another layer here: overstimulation. If you live in a world that constantly demands your attention, your brain eventually stops being able to hold on to anything for long. Everything becomes background noise. Hobbies, relationships, goals, they all blur together because your system is too overloaded to commit emotional resources to any one thing. So you cycle through interests like channels on a screen, not because you're shallow, but because your brain is trying to survive the noise by refusing to attach to any single signal. And this ties directly to expectation. If you've internalized the belief that anything worth doing must be done excellently, then the moment something stops feeling easy, it starts feeling like failure. You lose interest not because the thing stopped being interesting, but because you stop being good at it without effort. And if being good is the only version of engagement your brain will accept, then of course you'll walk away the second it gets hard, because hard feels like evidence that you're not enough. But the behavior itself, the pulling away, the losing interest, it's not the problem. It's the solution your brain found to a deeper question: how do I stay safe in a world that punishes caring too much? The answer it came up with was this: don't care too much. Don't stay too long. Don't let anything matter enough to break you. And for a while, that works. It keeps you moving. It keeps you protected. It keeps you from feeling the full weight of disappointment or rejection or failure. But it also keeps you from feeling the full weight of joy, of pride, of connection, because those things require the same vulnerability that your brain is trying to avoid. And so you end up here, in a place where you can start things, but not finish them, where you can feel excited, but not sustained, where you can care, but not deeply. And it's lonely, because no one sees the mechanism. They just see someone who can't commit, someone who loses interest, someone who moves on too easily. But you're not moving on. You're just moving away from the feeling of being left behind. This is emotional regulation in disguise. The losing of interest is your brain's way of keeping your nervous system from spiking too high or crashing too low. It's a way of staying in the middle, safe, predictable, controlled. Because if you never get too excited, you never have to feel too let down. And if you've spent years riding that emotional roller coaster, the idea of getting off it, even if it means staying in the middle forever, starts to feel like relief. But it's not relief, it's numbing. And numbing keeps you safe, but it also keeps you small. You are not broken for losing interest in the things you once loved. You are human. You are wired to protect yourself from pain. And if the cost of passion has been too high in the past, your brain will find a way to lower the cost, even if that means lowering the feeling altogether. That's not a flaw, it's survival. And it makes sense. All of it makes sense. You don't need to fix it, you just need to understand it. And maybe when you're ready, you need to ask yourself, what would it feel like to care about something past the point where it stops being easy? Not because you have to, but because you want to know what's on the other side of that wall your brain keeps building.